Hey, it's Matt. I'm back with another painting. This one's a little bit bigger. It's a 9 by 24 inch transparent watercolor of tree and barn swallows. I had the idea for this painting quite a while ago. It took me about a year to get around to doing it. In the spring of last year, we were birding in northern Ohio, and it was an especially cold and damp morning. It had been raining like crazy. We went out birding, and we were at a place called Metzger Marsh, and there were all of these swallows on the edge of a breakwall, and they were hunting for bugs that were among the rocks. Almost none of them were in flight. They were just kind of pop around a little bit here and there to find what bugs they could in those rocks, and they were getting quite a lot of insects. They were successful, but at the same time they weren't moving around a lot if they didn't have to. I actually had a bunch of them sketched and then kind of compiled them into one setting. Once those were combined, I transferred the sketches to the paper and frisketed off the birds and the rocks so I could do the background kind of quickly. I started by using a 4-inch painting brush to just wet the paper and get it nice and evenly wet, and then I went about putting a wet-on-wet wash in of some kind of blue-greens. And I wanted to have it very light in the background and not a whole lot of, not a super amount of tone on the top of the page. I wanted to kind of just fade away. As that was setting up, I blotted off the extra colors. So after I had the initial wash in, I hit that with the hairdryer to lock that in. And after I looked at it, it was a little more gray than I wanted, and so I wanted to bring in a little bit more of a kind of a green color. So I washed in another layer to bring in a little bit more tone. And you can see my bringing in some of the greenish kind of colors with a little bit of phthalo green and phthalo blue in there. And then blotted off the extra, and then hit that with the hairdryer again to lock in the colors. So I had a wash that I was happy with. So at that point I was happy with the background, and I peeled off all that frisket and got back to the white of the paper. I wanted to have the boulders kind of fade down at the bottom of the page. So I transferred the rest of my sketch to the page. And I did this using tracing paper, which has the pencil on the back side of the tracing paper, and then I used a folding bone to just kind of transfer that by just rubbing the paper, and that transfers the graphite from the opposite side of the tracing paper. So then I went about just washing in the lightest local colors, and almost all of this was done with the number 6 round brush. You can see a little bit of my photo reference up top. It's kind of reflected from the lights above the drafting table, but you can see that they were kind of the overall scene was very, very white, and we had overcast skies. It had been raining all morning, so things were kind of bleached out looking on the rocks and in the background. So I kind of tried to liven up those crushed limestone boulders that they were sitting on and add a bit of color. And so I'd use some of those blue-greens from the background for the shadow areas and introduce some purples. And then on the opposite left side of each of the rocks and the birds, I tried to warm that up with a little bit of yellows and ochres and things like that to kind of introduce some color that, some of those ochres would go with the colors that were going to go on the barn swallows, and some of those blue-greens that would go into the shadows would then make the tree swallow colors work really well. I like painting with these kind of long, thin formats, whether it's vertical or horizontal. They tend to be very, if you're doing them vertically, they tend to be very energetic. If you do them horizontally, they kind of have a nice rhythm to them, and they just have a feel to them that you don't get with a more traditional, 7 by 10 inch format or something along those lines. So at this point, for some of the sharp details, I was using a number 2 round brush that was pretty new, so it was nice and sharp. And for the tree swallows, I'd use kind of at the head area, I was using kind of some blue greens, using phthalo green and phthalo blue to do a lot of the head. And then as it worked back into the more purpley blue things, I would switch to my my ultramarine blues and things like that, and purples for rendering the shadows. And that gives you a nice range of things that read as blue but have a lot of personality to them. It kind of matches the bird's colorations of that shift from blue-green to purpley-blue. And I tried to bring in some of those similar tones into the darks of the wings and into the cracks of the boulders that they were sitting on. And it took many, many layers to get these to the point that, they kind of started looking very round and filled out. And it was just glazing, starting with, very light washes, and then just getting progressively more opaque and a little bit darker as I went, building up those tones from light to dark and from wet to dry. As the birds progressed, I found that I was going to need to spend a little bit more time modeling the shade underneath them on the rocks and below their feet. Typically, rounding out the bellies of the birds takes a while to get it to read just right, and oftentimes then you have the rock there that looks right, but then you've got to really darken that whatever they're standing on, you have to darken that up to the point that the belly's still reading as white, and you have a nice shadow underneath it to get a good separation. You can see a little bit on this part where the photo reference is that they were kind of very, very high-key shots, very light, and kind of devoid of much color. And so I was trying to introduce a lot of that color into the painting to make it more interesting. And for me, I have to say I am typically attracted to saturated color, so I usually try to find places that I can bring it in and brag it up. And there you can see the tree swallow, reference that I was using. And again, it's very, very subdued colors. It's a beautiful collection of birds. I usually don't think of the tree swallows and barn swallows as being, buddies and hanging around, but I think it was just so cold and so miserable of a morning, and that was where the food was, that they just all were exploiting the same food source, and they didn't seem to be fighting each other for it. They seemed to get along pretty well. Here I'd switch to switching between a 10-aught and a 2 brush for doing some of the detail work. And the feet, and that's where you take out the tiny brushes to get all those toenails and little scales on the feet done correctly. At this point, it was really just putting lots of details in with the darks, and it was almost done. So I signed it and then picked away at a few last details and cracks and crevices on the rocks and called it quits. So there you go. It is a 9 by 24 inch painting of tree and barn swallows. I hope you enjoyed it. If you get a chance, leave a comment or have a peek at the blog or the website. Thanks.